brings back memories, doesn't it? The music, I mean. There are so many moments like this when it comes to Looney Tunes. It makes you think how much classical music we've all been exposed to unconsciously through Looney Tunes. Was it some grand conspiracy to inculcate classical music into the brains of children? Or something far less benign? The latter, of course. In this video, we will explore why classical music pops up repeatedly in Looney Tunes and why it's memorable even now. This is But first, some history. Before the advent of talkies, or films with sound, there were silent films. Whenever you went to a theater, someone at an organ or a piano would play music to go along with what was playing on screen. These guys were called accompanists, or skilled musicians who played a wide range of music for dramas, comedies, and cartoons. That's quite a difficult job to say the least, not to mention there was always a demand for new music. This demand was partially filled by published collections like this one. They contain excerpts from existing compositions and original material. These excerpts were easily identified by their titles like Marriage, Hurry, Firefighting, and it was a great shorthand for the musician to fit the mood of a particular scene. It just so happens that one of the most famous cartoon composers would have his start as an accompanist. If you're familiar with Looney Tunes, then you've seen his name before. Carl Stalling. Stalling started his career as a theater organist at the St. Louis Theater. By his mid-20s, he not only played the organ but led the orchestra at the Isis Movie Theater in Kansas City. And then during this time, he met and befriended Walt Disney. The two would work together on several of Disney's projects before Stalling moved to Warner Bros. In 1936. Stalling's musical style was thus informed by his experience as a composer and accompanist in Kansas City. Stalling often preferred to use popular music in his compositions. This is a very important point. At Warner Bros., he could do this with reckless abandon. For starters, Looney Tunes cartoons, especially those created from 1930 to 1936, relied more on music rather than plot to carry an entire episode. Warner Bros. Also had an extensive music library due to owning various publishing houses. But how did Stalling choose the songs that would go into his compositions? According to Chuck Jones, he was a brilliant musician, but the quickest way for him to write a musical score, and he did one 6-minute score a week, was to simply look up some music that had the proper name. If there was a lady dressed in red, he'd play The Lady in Red. If somebody went into a cave, he'd play Fingal's Cave. If we were doing anything about eating, he'd do A Cup of Coffee, A Sandwich, and You. I had a bee one time, and my God, if he didn't go and find a piece of music written in 1906 or something called I'm a Busy Little Bumblebee. This harkens back to the catalogs Stalling used in his accompanying days with the appropriate titles. And ultimately, it was his way of making corny inside jokes. And if the audience picked up on them by recognizing the song title and the lyrics, that added to the experience. Hence, Stalling's frequent use of popular music. The last aspect of Carl Stalling's style that I'll touch on was synchronization, or matching music to the animation. According to Stalling, perfect synchronization of music for cartoons was a problem in the past, since there were so many quick changes and actions that the music had to match. Some invention or new method had to be developed, and that thing was the bar sheet. It allowed Stalling and many of his peers to determine the timing of each scene before the animation was created. Here's why synchronization was integral to the animation process. The music you heard in that last clip was Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 by Franz Liszt. But Liszt was only one among a host of composers that appear on Looney Tunes. At the top of the list is Wagner, followed by Rossini. I will probably butcher every last one of these names, so hold on to your seat, folks. Mendelssohn, our boy Liszt, Chopin, Franz von Suppy, Brahms, Johann Strauss, Schubert, Schumann, Tchaikovsky, and Beethoven. All things considered, that's a pretty short list. And I cannot stress this enough, most of the time only a fragment of a piece was used. As Daniel Goldmark, author of Tunes for Toons, Music in the Hollywood Cartoon, put it, the key to many of the pieces chosen was that they had to have an easily digestible melody to make the rapid animation. As a result, the same fragments of certain works were used repeatedly, and a select few recurring composers were chosen. Pieces with easily identifiable motifs gave film accompanists and later animators and composers a simple means of connecting a tune with a visual idea, enabling them to give a sense of completion to each gesture once oral and visual. But okay, let's not let that spoil our enjoyment of these classic episodes of Looney Tunes, like And now, the answer to the question that I posed at the start of this video. Why use classical music? A multitude of reasons, but we'll stick to a handful. Some were popular in other films. This is a case with the score that appears in Bugs Bunny Rides Again. The Lone Ranger popularized the William Tell Overture, and it quickly became a perfect shorthand for all things cowboy. Another piece, Ride of the Valkyries, was popularized by Birth of a Nation. Versatility. Look, classical music is timeless in some respects. It's memorable and a fixture of the Western canon. Very few people are unfamiliar with Beethoven or Mozart, even in passing. Of course, nobody wakes up bumping Serenade No. 13. Yeah. But what I am saying is that you know it when you hear it. Combine that with how versatile a classical piece can be for a specific mood or occasion, and you have magic, I guess. Case in point, sometimes it's literally in the name, like A Barber in Seville. A Barber in Seville, for humorous effect. And we talked about this earlier, but Starling often chose songs to, complement a specific visual gag and basically telling the story through music. For instance, in Wow, that is a tongue twister, Catch as Cats Can, when Sylvester swallows a bar of soap, this way. Did you catch it? Of course you didn't, but at the time, viewers would have recognized that snippet as I'm forever blowing bubbles. You get it? Because he's blowing bubbles and the song is called. And finally, the clash between classical music and popular music, high culture and low culture. This is the overriding theme in many of the Looney Tunes cartoons that centered around classical music. The legacy of classical music in these cartoons carries on today. Many say it's their first exposure to classical music. Kill the Wabbit, kill the Wabbit, kill the Wabbit. Has become synonymous in many ways with Wagner's piece. But maybe it's a little overblown. As we've seen, classical pieces were not the main focus for Starling, popular music was. The fact that the same motifs from like a handful of composers show up repeatedly kinda gives the audience a limited understanding of classical music. It just so happened that Looney Tunes, one of the most popular franchises, became the last vestige of classical music in a world that cares less and less about it as time goes on. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the idea that a significant connection existed between cartoons and classical music is that it existed at all. The reputation of the Warner Bros. Cartoons for their extensive use of classical music is the result of a combination of coincidences. Starling's adherence to an outmoded method of composing film scores might have been due to any number of reasons. His technique proved effective for the eccentric structure of the Warner Brothers cartoons, and his consistency led to the presence of brief excerpts of classical music in the soundtrack for hundreds of cartoons. In the early days of television, programmers looking for content for children's programs recycled whatever cartoons were available as an inexpensive resource, and as the presence of classical music in American culture receded, Along with the decline of music education in the latter decades of the 20th century, the snatches of classical compositions and cross-stalling soundtracks continue to be heard. As Americans cite the Warner Brothers cartoons as their only contact with classical music, it is not so much a comment on the presence of classical music in the Hollywood cartoons as it is on its absence elsewhere in American popular culture. And I couldn't have put it better myself. Check out all the sources and links that I have in the description. Like and subscribe if you like this video. More videos to come, so do all that YouTube stuff.